These are the lecture notes for Chapter 22, and we are starting with slide 18. The phylum Blastocladiomycota, they're also known as the blastoclads, are found in either terrestrial or aquatic environments. All of them produce asexual zoospores. Remember, zoospores have flagella so they can swim. And we aren't going to talk a whole lot about this phylum, but there is an example here. The species Physoderma matus is a plant pathogen that causes brown spot and stalk rot on corn. Then we have the phylum Neocalymastigomycota. Neocalymastigomycetes. That's just another way to say that's just a different use, grammatical use of the word. But anyway, the Neocalymastigomycetes lack mitochondria. That's what really distinguishes them. They're anaerobic, so they do not require oxygen, and they live in the guts of ruminants like cows and other herbivores. Ruminants like sheep and cows and non-mammalian herbivores like some lizards depend on these fungi to break down cellulose, which is found in plant cell walls, and lignin, which is also a very tough substance that's found in plants. Without these fungi, these animals would not be able to obtain nutrition and calories from their plant-based diets. For example, humans and dogs and cats can't break down and digest grass, but these ruminants can, and one of the reasons is because they have these fungi that live in their guts. Then we move on to the chytrids, the Chytridiomycota. They are the simplest fungi, and they are aquatic. Some are single-celled, and others do form hyphae. Most reproduce asexually through zoospores. And the chytrids play a role in decay and digestion of dead aquatic organisms, but then there are some that are parasites, and this is the one I want you to know. I had mentioned to you that there was a type of chytrid that caused a disease in frogs and affects their skin. So the name of the species that causes this skin disease is Batrachochytrium dendrobatitis. Batrachochytrium dendrobatitis. And this species has decimated populations of frogs all over the world. And because it infects the skin of the frogs, it inhibits their oxygen, their intake of oxygen, and it suffocates them. They finally die from it. Here's a picture of a zoospore here in the center, picture B. Now, the phylum Zygomycota produce zygospores. Their asexual spores are called zygospores. But what I want you to know, what I want you to focus on is the species that causes black bread mold, and it's Rhizopus stolonifera. But you could just remember Rhizopus. And really just remember that zygospores are the sexual spores of the Zygomycota. Here's a picture of the life cycle. I don't really focus a lot. There's information throughout the slides and the reading on life cycles. I don't focus on life cycles until we get to plants. But here's a picture of the spores, which are haploid, landing on bread and then germinating into hyphae. And then the hyphae of two different mating types. Notice how they don't refer to them as Male and female, they refer to them as negative mating type and positive mating type. But they, those hyphae will fuse and form a zygote, and then that zygote will form a zygospore, and the zygospore will undergo meiosis, and spores will be produced, and then the cycle will continue. So it's just a cycle of spores and hyphae, you know. Okay, the phylum Glomeromycota includes some symbiotic fungi, which we will also talk about in section 22.3. But the Glomeromycota are often referred to as the AM fungi, which stands for arbuscular mycorrhizal fungi. It's a small group. They form mycorrhizae, and mycorrhizae are a mutualistic association of plants and fungi. And what that means is that the plant benefits and the fungus benefits from their association. They help plants to absorb more nutrients because they increase the surface area of their roots. And then the fungus gets food from the plant. Then we get to the largest phylum. I think it's the largest. Hold on a minute. Let me see. 31,000 species versus... Oh yeah, it's the largest. I thought it was. Okay, so the phylum Ascomycota is the largest phylum of fungi, and they are referred to with the common name sac fungi. They can reproduce asexually or sexually, and their sexual spores are named after the phylum, so they would be called ascospores. So this phylum consists of mold and yeast and lots of others. So we'll talk about, you may have a question about this in your practice test. The asexual spores are called conidiospores, and the sexual spores are called ascospores. Both of those terms are in red on slide 28. The yeast can reproduce asexually by a process called budding. You can see a picture of this. You see, here's the yeast cell, the parent yeast cell, and then here's the bud, which is the baby, basically grows as a bud off the side of the parent. And then eventually it will break off and grow into a mature yeast cell. And then on the right, this is penicillin, or penicillium, which produces penicillin. So yeast and mold, yeast reproduce by budding. Molds tend to reproduce asexually using conidiospores that are dispersed by the wind. And then sexual reproduction takes place in a fruiting body called an ascocarp. And the sexual spores are called ascospores. So here you can see, I just want to refer you to the picture on the right. This is a morel. Morels are edible sac fungi. They're kind of a gourmet fungus. But that is their fruiting body, is the ascocarp. There are two types of yeast. There's one type that's used to make bread and beer, and then there's another type that causes yeast infections. The yeast that's used to make bread and beer is called Saccharomyces cerevisiae. And through fermentation, yeast are going to produce ethanol and carbon dioxide gas. The carbon dioxide gas produces the kind of the air holes in the bread that makes it look kind of spongy. And it also produces the foam in the beer. And the ethanol, of course, is the alcohol portion of the beer, but it bakes off whenever you bake bread. But it's the reason why beer and bread, whenever you go to a bread factory, it smells like beer, you know, because they're made by the same process. It's that yeast that you're smelling and the process of fermentation. So those are in the phylum Ascomycetes. There's another species, which is a mold. It's called Aspergillus, and it undergoes fermentation to produce soy sauce and miso, if you've ever had miso. Penicillium is used to make all different kinds of cheese, and it's also the source of penicillin, an antibiotic. And then the yeast that can harm humans is called Candida albicans, and that can cause yeast infections in the mouth, called thrush, and it can cause vaginal yeast infections in women. And here's a picture of thrush in a child. And then here's also a picture of ringworm, which if you didn't realize that ringworm was a fungal infection, that ringworm is caused by a species of Ascomycetes. And our last phylum of fungi are called the Basidiomycetes, Basidiomycota, or club fungi. And these are the most, probably the ones you recognize, the most common fungi to most people anyway. The phylum includes mushrooms, toadstools, puffballs, and if you've never seen a puffball, they almost look like a cocoon, like a butterfly cocoon, but they are brown, and if you step on it, then it will all the spores will come out in kind of like a puff of smoke, maybe. But they're fun if you're a little kid, in the walking along in the springtime, There are also shelf fungi or bracket fungi that grow on as a bracket off the side of a tree, off the bark of a tree. Then we have jelly fungi, bird's nest fungi, and stinkhorns. All of these are Basidiomycota, and there are some plant diseases such as smuts and rust that you find on some of the crop plants that are from this phylum as well. They can reproduce sexually and they use basidiospores. The fruiting body is the basidiocarp. We recognize that as a mushroom. The spores are windblown. And here's a picture of a poisonous mushroom. A lot of your poisonous mushrooms are white in color. This is ergot, which is an infection of rye, which is one of your, I'll be honest, give me just a second. Okay, I had to pause and do a little research, and I apologize for this, but sometimes you can make a mistake and remember that even better than you would remember it if you didn't make a mistake. So I'm not going to change the video, but I do want to make sure that you know, even though we've been talking about the phylum Basidiomycota, the ergot is an example of the Ascomycota. So be careful there. That's an infection of rye that's found in the Ascomycota phylum. Now, there are crop infections called smuts and rust that are Basidiomycota, but the ergot is an example of Ascomycota, and it's just misplaced in the slides, and I'll go back and fix it later. But these are some pictures of some club fungi or Basidiomycota. Here's a shelf fungus. You probably recognize most of these. This is a mushroom. Then we have a puffball. You can see what I mean. Doesn't it look a little bit like a cocoon? And the spores just burst out of the puffball and they germinate, and that's how that works. Then we have bird's nest fungi, and you can see why they get their name. They don't have a picture of a jelly fungus, but it really does look like jelly. And then here's a stinkhorn that attracts flies. Now, our section 3, because a lot of this overlaps with content that we've already discussed, I'm going to cover it real quick. It's on symbiotic relationships of fungi, and of course, symbiosis is a close association between two different species. If it's mutualistic, then both species benefit. The examples of symbiosis that we are going to look at are lichens, and mycorrhizae. But first, we're going to look at some parasitic fungi, and here's one that's from the Ascomycota. It's called Ophiostoma, and it's a parasite of elm trees. Then there's Physoderma matus, which is a corn parasite. There are smuts and rusts, which are Basidiomycota, and they parasitize cereal crops. Here you see a picture of a corn smut. And then there's some fungal infections in animals. The Pseudogymnoascus destructans. I'm sorry. Let's try this again. Pseudogymnoascus destructans is responsible for white nose syndrome in bats, and that is an Ascomycota. And you can see a picture here. I see their little white noses. Lichens are a symbiotic relationship between a fungus and an algae or a cyanobacterium. We're not sure if it's a mutualistic relationship or parasitic relationship, but you just need to know who the partners are. And the fungal partner is, there's a fungal partner, and then there's an algal partner that carries out photosynthesis, either algae or cyanobacteria, but there's one of the partners carries out photosynthesis. So these are called lichens, and they grow on, a lot of times they grow on rocks and tree bark. The lichens are crustose, fruticose, or foliose, and lichens are also pollution indicators. They cannot survive where the air is polluted. So if you see lichens, this one is really common, foliose lichen. I know you've seen ones like this. Here's a crustose lichen growing on rocks, and then these are called fruticose lichens. But if you see them growing on tree bark or rocks, then you can be pretty sure the air is clean. Then there's mycorrhizae, which we've already talked about. That is a combination of a glomeromycota and the root of a plant. And the function is to increase the absorption, increase the surface area of the roots for greater absorption of water and nutrients. And then we have something in the wrong place again. Truffles are gourmet edible fungi that grow near the roots of oak trees, and they this is a black truffle, but these are in the phylum Ascomycota. That's not really in the wrong place, I don't guess, but they are from the phylum Ascomycota, truffles. And we will end here with our chapter 22 recordings.